October 7th, 2023. Hamas launches a surprise attack on Israel. Rockets rain down on cities. Armed militants cross the border. Chaos erupts. But within hours, something remarkable happens. The Israeli Defense Forces deploy Palantir's AI system. Not just software, the entire intelligence backbone. Tracking movements in real time, predicting targets, coordinating strikes. Palantir didn't just provide a tool, they provided the brain, the operating system for modern warfare. And Israel? They're just one client. The CIA uses Palantir to track terrorists across the globe. The Pentagon uses it to manage the most complex logistics operation in human history. Ukraine uses it to fight Russia, analyzing tank movements and predicting attacks before they happen. ICE uses it to find and deport undocumented immigrants across America. Palantir, Peter Thiel's company, has become the invisible operating system of modern governments, the software that runs wars, tracks people, and makes decisions about life and death. And once you're locked in, there's no escape, because the system is so deeply integrated, so fundamentally embedded in how governments operate, that switching would take 5 to 10 years, and in that time, you'd be blind, defenseless. Palantir knows this, and that's exactly why they're worth $50 billion. This is the story of how one company built a monopoly on state power, and why that should terrify you. Let's start at the beginning. Who is Peter Thiel? He's not a typical tech founder. He's a billionaire, a philosopher, a libertarian who believes democracy and freedom are incompatible, a man who once wrote that he no longer believes democracy can work. He co-founded PayPal, was the first outside investor in Facebook, made billions. But Palantir is different. Palantir isn't about making money from consumers, it's about making money from governments. And governments, unlike consumers, don't have a choice. Once they're dependent, they're stuck, forever. Palantir was founded in 2003, right after 9/11. The world was terrified of terrorism. Intelligence agencies were drowning in data, but couldn't connect the dots. The CIA, the FBI, the NSA, they all had information, but their systems didn't talk to each other. Separate databases, separate tools, no integration. And that failure, many believed, allowed 9/11 to happen. Thiel saw an opportunity, not to help out of patriotism, but to build something powerful, something governments would need so badly they'd pay anything for it, something they couldn't live without. He recruited a team, not just engineers, philosophers, mathematicians, people who thought about power, systems, and control. And they built Palantir Gotham, a platform designed to integrate all government data, intelligence reports, financial records, social media, phone calls, emails, satellite images, everything. And not just integrate it, analyze it, find patterns, predict behavior, identify threats. It was the intelligence analyst's dream tool, and the privacy advocate's nightmare. The first customer was the CIA, specifically In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm. They invested in Palantir early, and once the CIA was using it, other agencies followed. The FBI, the NSA, the Department of Defense, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then foreign governments, Israel, the UK, France, over 50 countries, all using Palantir to run their intelligence operations. And here's the key. Palantir isn't just software you install, it's a service. Palantir engineers embed themselves in government agencies. They customize the system. They train the analysts. They become part of the operation. And once you're that integrated, you can't just switch to a competitor, because there is no competitor. And even if there were, extracting Palantir would mean rebuilding your entire intelligence infrastructure from scratch. No government can afford that, especially not in the middle of a war or a crisis. But let's talk about what Palantir actually does, because this isn't just a database. This is predictive analytics, machine learning, AI-driven intelligence. Imagine you're the Israeli Defense Forces. You have millions of data points, Phone calls intercepted, social media posts scraped, financial transactions monitored, satellite images analyzed. How do you make sense of it all? How do you know which data matters? That's where Palantir comes in. It doesn't just store data, it finds connections, it identifies patterns, it predicts behavior. Here's how it worked on October 7th. Hamas launched the attack. Within hours, Palantir's system was processing every piece of intelligence Israel had. Cell phone pings, intercepted communications, drone footage, historical movement patterns of known militants, and it started making predictions. Where will they go next? Who are the key commanders? What supply routes are they using? Where should we strike to maximize impact? Israeli analysts didn't have to sift through millions of data points manually. Palantir did it for them, automatically, in real time, and Israel responded faster, more precisely than they ever could have without it. Now multiply that by every country using Palantir. The Pentagon uses it to coordinate troop movements across dozens of countries, logistics, supply chains, who needs ammunition where, which bases are vulnerable, where to position aircraft carriers. It's like playing a real-time strategy game, except the stakes are real lives and real wars, and Palantir is the engine running the game. Ukraine is another example. Since the war with Russia started in 2022, Ukraine has been using Palantir to track Russian military movements. Where are the tanks? Where are the troops? What's the supply line? Palantir analyzes satellite images, intercepts communications, cross-references with historical data, and tells Ukrainian commanders where to strike. And it works. Ukraine, a country with a much smaller military than Russia, has held its ground partly because it has better intelligence, better data, better predictions. Palantir gives them an edge, and that edge saves lives, or ends them depending on which side you're on. But here's the uncomfortable question. Should a private company have this much power? Palantir isn't a government agency, it's a profit-forward corporation. And Peter Thiel isn't an elected official, he's a billionaire with his own political beliefs. Beliefs that include skepticism about democracy. Beliefs that suggest freedom and democracy are incompatible. And yet, he controls the software that governments use to wage war, track citizens, and make life and death decisions. What happens if Palantir's interests and the government's interests diverge? What happens if Palantir decides to cut off a client? Or worse, what happens if Palantir gets hacked? Let's talk about the Osama bin Laden raid, May 2, 2011. Navy SEALs storm a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. They kill bin Laden, the most wanted terrorist in the world. How did they find him? The official story involves years of intelligence work, tracking couriers, analyzing patterns, cross-referencing data. But here's what's not in the official story. Palantir. Multiple leaks and reports suggest that Palantir's software was used to identify bin Laden's location. The CIA never confirmed it, Palantir never confirmed it, but the timeline fits. The CIA was using Palantir. The intelligence breakthrough came from data integration and pattern analysis, exactly what Palantir does, and former Palantir employees have hinted that they were involved. If it's true, it means one of the most significant intelligence successes in modern history was powered by a private company, a company that answers to shareholders, not voters. Now let's talk about the ethical nightmare. ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, uses Palantir to track and deport undocumented immigrants. Palantir's software cross-references databases, license plate readers, social media, employment records, financial transactions, and it builds profiles. Who were the undocumented people? Where do they live? Where do they work? Who are their family members? ICE agents use this to conduct raids, to separate families, to deport people who've lived in the U.S. for decades. And Palantir provides the tools to do it efficiently, effectively, at scale.
This has sparked massive protests. Human rights organizations have called for Palantir to stop working with ICE. Employees inside Palantir have protested, some have quit. But the contracts continue, because from Palantir's perspective, they're not making moral judgments. They're providing tools. What governments do with those tools isn't their responsibility. That's the argument. But is it valid? If you build the tool that enables something, are you responsible for how it's used? Palantir says no. Critics say yes. And the debate continues. But the contracts remain, because ICE, like every other government agency, is now dependent. They can't operate without Palantir. They're locked in. Here's the game theory at play. Palantir has created what's called strategic dependency. Governments become so reliant on Palantir that they can't function without it. And Palantir knows this, so they don't compete on price. They compete on integration, on indispensability. Once you're using Palantir, switching costs are astronomical. You'd have to retrain thousands of analysts, rebuild data pipelines, reintegrate systems, find new software that can do what Palantir does. And there's nothing that comes close. So you don't switch. You just keep paying. Every year. Forever. This is vendor lock-in on steroids. In the tech world, vendor lock-in usually means you're stuck with a software platform because migrating is annoying. But with Palantir, it's existential. If you're Israel and you stop using Palantir, you lose the intelligence edge that keeps your country safe. If you're Ukraine and you cancel your contract, you're blind against Russia. If you're the CIA and you walk away, terrorists get harder to track. The stakes are too high, so you stay. And Palantir knows it, and the price goes up, slowly, steadily. But you pay it, because you have no choice. Peter Thiel understands power better than almost anyone in Silicon Valley. He's not interested in building a consumer app that gets 1 billion users. He's interested in building systems that governments can't live without. Systems that embed themselves so deeply into critical operations that removing them is impossible. And he's succeeded. Palantir is now used by the CIA, FBI, NSA, Pentagon, DHS, ICE, dozens of foreign governments, and even some private corporations. It's everywhere, and it's indispensable. But here's the scary part. What does Palantir see? They process some of the most sensitive data in the world. Government secrets, intelligence reports, military plans. And yes, they're bound by contracts and security protocols, but they're also a private company with private interests, and Peter Thiel has very specific political views. He's funded political candidates, backed libertarian causes, supported controversial figures. He's not a neutral actor. He's a player with an agenda, and yet he controls access to some of the most powerful information on the planet. Now, let's talk about the conspiracy theories. And I want to be clear, I don't endorse these, but they exist, and they're worth mentioning because they reveal how people think about Palantir. Some believe Palantir is essentially a privatized intelligence agency, that it operates independently of government oversight, that it collects data for its own purposes, not just for terrorists or immigrants, that it's creating a surveillance state that answers to corporations, not governments. Is there evidence for this? Not really. But the fear is understandable, because Palantir is opaque. It doesn't publish transparency reports. It doesn't explain what data it collects or how it's used. It operates in the shadows. And when something operates in the shadows, people imagine the worst. Others believe Palantir is part of a larger project by Silicon Valley elites to reshape society. Peter Thiel is a well-known figure in libertarian and tech circles. He's talked about seasteading, building floating cities outside government control. He's talked about extending human lifespan through radical medical treatments. He's talked about creating new nations from scratch. And Palantir, in this view, is one tool in a broader vision. A world where traditional governments are replaced by tech-enabled systems, where democracy is replaced by algorithmic governance, where power is concentrated in the hands of those who control the technology. Again, this is speculative, but it's not baseless. Thiel has said things that align with this worldview, and Palantir is the proof of concept, a private company that governments depend on. That's power, real power, the kind that doesn't require elections. And then there's the hacking question. What if Palantir gets hacked? What if a foreign adversary, China, Russia, North Korea, gains access to Palantir systems? They'd see everything. CIA operations, military plans, intelligence networks. It would be the biggest intelligence breach in history. Worse than Snowden, worse than WikiLeaks. It would compromise every government using Palantir. And the scary thing is, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Every system gets hacked eventually, it's just a matter of time and effort, and Palantir is the highest value target imaginable. So what happens when it gets breached? Does the world find out, or does it stay secret? And who benefits from keeping it secret? So what does all this mean? It means we've entered an era where private companies have more power than many governments, and Palantir is the clearest example. They don't make consumer products, they don't rely on advertising, they don't care about your likes or clicks. They care about governments, about intelligence agencies, about the military-industrial complex, and they've succeeded in making themselves indispensable. Governments can't wage war without them, can't track threats without them, can't function at the level they need to without Palantir's tools. And Peter Thiel sits at the center of it all. A man who doesn't believe in democracy, who thinks freedom and governments are incompatible, who has built a company that governments depend on. That's power. Unelected, unaccountable, but very real. And it raises questions we don't have good answers for. Should private companies be allowed to become this embedded in government operations? Should one man have this much influence over intelligence and military decisions? What happens when Palantir's interests and the public's interests diverge? Who do they serve? The government paying them, or their shareholders, or Peter Thiel's vision for the future? There aren't easy answers, but the questions are urgent because Palantir isn't going anywhere. They're growing, expanding, adding more clients, more countries, more use cases. They're moving into healthcare, into finance, into corporate espionage prevention. Palantir wants to be the operating system for every major decision-making institution on the planet, and they're getting there, one government contract at a time, one dependency at a time, one lock-in at a time. And here's the thing, Palantir works. It's effective. It saves lives. It stops terrorists. It helps win wars. It's not evil, it's powerful. And power in the right hands can do good. But power in the wrong hands can do catastrophic harm. And the problem with Palantir is that we don't really know whose hands it's in. Is it in the hands of the governments using it, or is it in the hands of the company providing it? And if it's the company, then it's in the hands of Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel is not elected, not accountable, not bound by democratic norms. He's a billionaire with a worldview. And that worldview is now embedded in the software running some of the most important institutions in the world.